Welcome back to Cover Your Assets this fine December Saturday afternoon. Now, in the grand scheme of our topic today, it's 4th and 13. Fourth quarter, 13 days ago. Where are you financially? Because that's what we talk about here on Cover Your Assets. Financial tactics for the 21st century. We've got Craig Nestor, foreclosure defense, Todd Rooker, unbiased advice, and then, of course, today, Derek Walgrave, and he is an investment property and short sale specialist. So just as we were going to the break, I mean, Craig, you kind of set it up talking about an investment property owner who was trying to decide if he should short sale a couple properties.
Yep, we have we open the phone lines up and we get calls during the week, and people talk to us about the spots they're in. And people are either in a spot where they're trying to get out of something or trying to get into something, or they're just trying to get their nose above water. And we take those calls and we work with that family, with this group of professionals. We'll call Derek and we'll call Todd and Heidi, who's here now, and we'll look at all the ways that are possible options for that family. What we find is that people can make good decisions if they get accurate information that applies to them specifically and tactically. And so that's what we do first, is we give them the straight information. So his situation was, Todd, he has a primary residence. He's on that primary mortgage with his wife. He has 2 investment properties. Neither one are in his wife's name, so he's both on his own. Neither one has second mortgages. Both are empty right now, and he's carrying the mortgage with his own income. He's no longer wanting to do that. He's going to try to rent them out for half price, get some dough, and do a strategic walk away. Let them both go simultaneously, get as much cash as he can instead of short sale. Now, you and I are not licensed realtors, so we don't care if he short sales or not. I was trying to present the benefit of it is better to short sale near the end of this process, so because it's easier to re-enter as a buyer, and he's only 33 years old.
Well, it is. Foreclosure on a credit report can be pretty devastating in a credit score. There's lenders who will make decisions on foreclosures versus short sales that can be significantly different. But whenever you look at a situation like that, it is complex. And what to do and what not to do. Another question that you would want to ask is there mortgage insurance? If there's private mortgage insurance, PMI, then doing a short sale could be exceedingly problematic, because you could get to the end of the share sale taking place, have a 6-month redemption period. At that point, no longer can the lender pursue deficiency, which is why when Craig said there's only one mortgage, you can't just take away from the fact that if you only have one loan, then you have no issues. There's always judicial foreclosures, and if you're dealing with a local bank, you could find that they'll go to a judicial foreclosure, and they're obviously on the rise today.
They're on the rise today.
And
Absolutely.
And a judicial foreclosure, they can pursue deficiency on first position liens. They can still have a sheriff's auction, and then you get a longer redemption period, but they can come after you for all the money, legal costs, interest penalties, and everything else, and they don't have to wait till the foreclosure process ends to pursue you personally. As soon as you go into default and they make you aware that this is what's going on, they immediately can file a judgment and then lien your property. So you have to be aware of that too. When you look at an individual who wants to make the distinction of what they should do, you have to ask, is there a local bank? If you go beyond sheriff's auction, remember, if there's mortgage insurance, well, the lender can no longer pursue deficiency. However, the MI company, mortgage insurance company, who has to pay out to the lender when it's, because remember, lender's not obligated to pay out until foreclosure actually takes place. So after a share sale, you've got a 6-month redemption period. If a short sale takes place, that lender is still expecting that they're going to get paid by the mortgage insurance company. The mortgage insurance company is not obligated to pay until the end of the redemption period. So it is a negotiation where oftentimes the mortgage insurance company will say, great, we'll go ahead and pay on this, but we want you to get the buyer to sign off and agree on a promissory note to repay us the money that we're going to pay back. Well, obviously the homeowner is going to say, heck with that, I'm not doing that. Well, now you're bound to wind up letting it go all the way to foreclosure as a result. So there's a lot of complexity. Big bank, small bank, all these things are different and have to be handled differently.
So there's a lot to the foreclosure aspect, and we're going to hear another voice here in the room, and I'd like to introduce and make sure everybody knows who's here. Heidi Pavelka from Rubicon Mortgage is probably going to be jumping in on this. Todd, when you talk about a judicial foreclosure, that's not the traditional type of foreclosure that everybody knows about, and I think what you just described there is the fact that people sort of got used to hearing stories about the fact that you could stop making your payments and it'd be a year and a half to 2 years before you'd have to leave your house. What you're saying is that worm has turned.
It is turning, okay. But I think that one of the things that is important to know is that if you're going to do it, the environment is conducive because 95% of the foreclosures are going to be non-judicial where they don't pursue. And if your loan balance is small enough and you're smart enough not to try to get a modification and thereby give them all of your updated financial information, because if you do that, you might have shown them how strong you are financially and why they should do a judicial foreclosure and pursue you. So you got to be really careful.
Okay.
Well, on the sheriff's sales, I'm seeing the lenders actually delay the sheriff's sale
so they can pursue.
While they look at the research based on the loan modification paperwork to see how they're going to foreclose. And when I started this about 3 years ago, and obviously, Todd, you were there 3 years ago, it was maybe 1-2%, and now it's almost 10% are judicial foreclosures, which is completely different.
It's a much more strategic approach to this. And, people are trying to get a loan modification. Remember, at the end of the day, the bank grants a loan modification if it's the lesser of evils to them. Well, if they look at you and you just gave them all updated financial information and you look fabulous, in so much as when you walk away from this house, you can service that debt. And they'll draw it out for 5-10 years to make it more accommodating. So you can now make payments on a house you don't own anymore for the next 10 years.
Well, and what's worse than that is that they'll put them on a low payment for that 5 or 10 years that doesn't equal the balance. But it allows the consumer to sign for the balance. So after that initial 5 or 10 year period is over, they still owe the rest.
And it balloons. And not only that, if they do give you any negotiated amount on a payment plan, you can be utterly certain that there's unwinding clauses in so much as if you break the performance of that payment plan in any way, now you owe 100% of the debt plus interest and penalties that might have otherwise been occurring throughout the whole time.
See, that's frightening. And we talk about loan modifications, or rather the myth of, here on Cover Your Assets, 855-835-8500, 855-835-8500 all the time. But here's a funny thing. You do the loan mod paperwork, and if you can't afford your house, now they can look at that and say, okay, here's how we want to foreclose. Or like what you just said, if you look great on paper, then they'll say, oh, we're going to foreclose and make you still pay us the money.
Well, what if you don't look good on paper per se for that home? Meaning that home has got a $750,000 mortgage, and even if they modify it, assuming they won't decrease principal balance to 2%, you still can't afford it. However, they know when you leave that home, you're going to be in a home where you're paying $1,200 to $1,700 per month in rent, and now you have tremendous capacity to service the deficient debt for the next 10 years. See, you got to be really careful. Look, I can't afford a $700,000 house. Yeah, but you know what? You drop your payment back to $1,500 in a rent situation. You got $200,000 in deficient debt, and we'll amortize $200,000 over the next 20 years. Tell us you can't make the payment now when you're making $90,000 a year. See, that isn't enough to be able to make the $750,000 a month mortgage payment, but with your piddly little rent, it is enough to service the deficient debt. They're not just looking at where you are right now. They're looking at where you will be in the future and your capacity to repay that debt. Mm-hmm. So you got to be careful.
That is just frightening. Now, you said something also, Todd, before the break, because we kind of started out with the gentleman that reached out to Craig this last week with 2 income properties. And a lot of times, there's a different scenario. It's looked at different when you're talking about investment property versus someone's resident. But you talked about a couple where one spouse was on the mortgage and one wasn't. And you actually will advise that. But in this case, they still had to be careful.
Sure. Because number one, on a credit report, when you attempt to get financing, the credit report will often update your new address.
Okay.
And so when you fill out a loan doc, and you're requesting financing, they're going to ask you where you've been for generally at least the last 3 years, and you're going to have to show if it's been the same home. Okay, that's simple. If it's not, they want to see multiple homes, and they're going to compare that against the information that they've got. Now, even if you're living in a home and you're not on the mortgage, they're going to say, well, what are you doing? Are you renting? What's the story here? Well, no. Well, okay. You mean your wife is in foreclosure. You're living in the home and the home is in foreclosure. Okay. That's a foreclosure. Okay. And so that nixes the deal. So it is true where if a person is not on the loan, they could go and get financing of their own volition with their own credit, their own income and all of that, provided that something like that doesn't come back and bite them. And look, maybe missing mortgage payments is not going to be problematic, but I'll guarantee you that when it goes into share sale and that takes place, you can bet your rear end that that's going to be problematic. And you're going to have to disclose that. Otherwise, you're basically just lying on your financial information.
Ooh, and see, Heidi, you kind of chimed in on that when we were sitting here at break, and we'll get to, lay away your low rate for the holidays. But I mean, kind of add a little bit to that from your perspective, from the lending standpoint, because, you see this.
I see it all the time. And Todd, you mentioned a very key point that when people are thinking that they can strategically go around and play the smoke and mirrors game, there is a lot of information that the lenders, the investors, and on the backside that they have and the ability to pull information to find out the true story. And I mean, you could pull a MERS report and all that information is going to come up. And like Todd said before, is when you're filling out that documentation and applying for a loan, you have to answer those questions. Are you currently going through divorce? Are you currently in a bankruptcy? Or are there any bankruptcy filings? Or are you in foreclosure? That is information that you have to sign. And when you sign, and you're basically, like you said, you're lying on the report. So
Part of my job is to have a person disclose what is going on in their life, because I want to know what is on the table and what the bank will see when they check you out. So if we're going to go to battle on a short sale and negotiate on a deficiency, we got to do that. Well, it relates to the same thing that Heidi's talking about, which is simply this. The capacity for a financial institution today to check you out is frightening.
very.
They have access to information that would blow your minds. Mm-hmm. And so many people are in the dark about that. It's like the old days where you could do stated income loans. But remember, if you filled out a 4506T, that gave them access to any of your IRS information, which means they can simply check with the IRS the FICA tax, in our case 15% FICA tax, and work the equation backwards and figure out instantly exactly how much you're making without you ever telling them what you're making. So there's so much information that they can check out. That's why I say everything that's licensed, registered, titled, insured, depreciated on taxes, incorporated entities throughout the United States. Why do I ask a client that in a meeting for discovery? Because I know the bank can find that out by pushing a button.
All right. 4th and 13, where are your finances? This is Cover Your Assets. 855-835-8500. That's 855-835-8500. More on that, short sales and how that might affect the mortgage picture in the future with Derek Walgrave, Heidi Pavelka, Craig Nesser, Todd Rooker will be back.
AM